In the last lesson, we talked about how the French economy was faltering, how the king came up with an idea to impose a new set of taxes on the third estate, how the king proposed a new voting system that would enable the first and the second estates to further exploit the people of the third estate. That brings us to another important point. What did the third estate do as a kind of protest, as a kind of rebellion against that voting system or against that imposition of taxes? To understand this in greater detail, we have to delve deeper into the responses of the third estate. Let's find out what the third estate did after this. Unable to cause any change in attitude in the first and the second estate, the third estate decided to do something. What the third estate decided to do was a very bold and radical step forward. Now, what was this step? What did the third estate decide to do? The third estate proclaimed itself the National Assembly. And when did it do so? The third estate proclaimed itself the National Assembly on the 17th of June 1789. Now, what does this National Assembly mean? Mind you, this was not an assembly of the third estate or of all the estates at large, but this was an assembly of all the people of France. This means that this National Assembly accounted for or was accountable to all the people of France. This was a major step taken by the third estate. It ceased to be the third estate and gave itself the shape, the formal shape of the National Assembly. Now let's find out what this National Assembly was and what was the response of the king. Before we get into the response of the king and what the National Assembly was, let me ask you a question. When did the third estate proclaim itself the National Assembly? Was it on the 17th of June 1789 or the 17th of July 1789, the 17th of August 1789 or the 17th of September 1789? What is the correct answer? Yes. The third estate proclaimed itself the National Assembly on the 17th of June 1789. But how did the king respond to this? This brings us to a discussion on the National Assembly. The National Assembly proclaimed itself an independent body of all the people of France. It asked the other two estates to join hands with it, but simultaneously it made it clear that it did not want to wait for the other estates to join hands with it. It meant that the National Assembly would work irrespective of the support of the other two estates or the monarch. It became an independent body of all the people of France. Now, the king did not like this idea of the formation of a National Assembly. Why is it so? This is because with this act of forming the National Assembly, the king realized that more and more power was going into the hands of the people. This would in turn divest the monarch of all power and in some time would overthrow the monarchy. The king realized that it had to do something to curb the growth of the National Assembly and simultaneously reassert his authority and his power on the French kingdom. What did he do? He saw that the National Assembly was continuing to hold its meetings. So, to stop further meetings from happening, on the 20th of June 1789, the king had the National Assembly's meeting hall locked up. This way, the king felt that the National Assembly will not be able to meet anymore. And if these people fail to gather together, they would slowly move away. So, the National Assembly will stop existing. This is the idea that the king had in mind when he locked up the National Assembly. But do you think that the National Assembly was also willing to submit to the king's idea, to submit to the king's diktat? Let's find that out. On that very day when the king had the meeting hall of the National Assembly locked up, these people also came together. But how did they come together? When these people came to the meeting hall and found it locked up, they instead went to a tennis court. Now, why did they go to a tennis court? Did they fancy a match there? Did they want to play a match? Definitely not. Instead, they went to a tennis court to meet together. So, the National Assembly met at a nearby tennis court. When the National Assembly met here, they realized that the king was apprehensive of the power of the people of France. The king was afraid of his power being overthrown, which is why he had the meeting hall closed up. This gave the National Assembly more power and confidence because they realized that by coming together, by bringing together the masses of France, they will be able to overthrow this monarchical rule. So, on this day, that is the 20th of June 1789, the National Assembly took the famous tennis court oath. Now let's find out what this oath proposed. This oath proposed that the people will remain united to bring France freedom and independence from the monarchical rule. They will remain united to give France a democratic constitution. A democratic constitution that will be formed by the people, that will be accountable to the people, and that will be for all the people. That will not be exclusionary in nature. That will not see people in terms of their social class or the estate they belong to. To put it simply, a constitution that would be truly democratic in nature. A constitution that would enforce liberty in France. This is what the tennis court oath proposed. The third estate, as we have talked about, comprised 98% of the population, and huge masses were being exploited by the monarchical rule. So, these people came together in the National Assembly, which is why it started gaining huge popularity. As many masses started joining the National Assembly, it also started gaining influence and power. Slowly, it started to be recognized as an independent body. Now we have to understand what was the task of this National Assembly. Initially, at the inception of the National Assembly, a sign was needed from the king to mention it or to declare it an independent legal body. But the king refused to do so because he saw that this body will be able to overthrow his rule. But slowly, as many people started joining the National Assembly, the king slowly realized that he had to give in. Because of the growing popularity, the National Assembly was also gaining influence. It is at this point that the king gave the National Assembly his formal approval. What did he also want the other estates to do? The king wanted both the first and the second estate to join this one National Assembly. So this somehow means that the National Assembly was going to gain victory, because the king was asking the first estate and the second estate to join this National Assembly, which means that he is giving this the recognition it deserves. But what meets the eye isn't always the reality always. The king's intention was something very different. Let us find out why. So with this, one is bound to think that the National Assembly was slowly gaining victory because the king had asked the first and the second state to join the National Assembly. But was it really victorious? Let's find out the day when the king declared the National Assembly an independent body. The king gave this declaration on the 9th of July 1789. And you will be surprised to know that following the king's declaration on this day, this National Assembly became the National Constituent Assembly. Now, why is this extra word constituent added to it? Previously it was National Assembly, and now following the king's declaration it became the National Constituent Assembly. Let's find out what is the significance of this word constituent in this regard. When something is constituent, it means that it has been given the task to form a constitution. So the task to form a constitution made the National Assembly the National Constituent Assembly. Now you must be feeling very happy to know that the king was finally giving the National Assembly the power to form a constitution. This National Constituent Assembly was tasked to form a democratic, equal and liberal constitution for France. This is somewhat believable and unbelievable at the same time, because this king, who was an autocratic monarch, gave the National Assembly the task to form a democratic, equal and liberal constitution. Now why is it so? Let's understand that. We just talked about how the National Assembly was formed and it took the shape of the National Constituent Assembly. How it was tasked to form a democratic and liberal constitution for France, and it came with the king's approval. Now it is imperative on our part to understand why the king decided to do this. This cannot be without a reason, because himself a monarch, the king might not suddenly want to have a liberal and democratic nation. So why did the king want to do this? It is this discussion, along with the immediate cause that led to the outbreak of the French Revolution, that we will be dealing with in the subsequent lesson. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers, or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million+ questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.